Welcome to our Public Accounts Committee. My name is Ferland Christians. I'm chairperson of SCOPA. I'm going to give the members first opportunity to introduce themselves. I see the ministers here with the department, and then we'll give Minister Simmons opportunity to introduce him and the department members. Over for you to introduction.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Benedicta van Minnen. I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leon van Wyk, a member of this committee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pet Lecker, and I'm a member of this committee.
Morning all, now French Mbombo, thank you.
Good morning, Chair, Minister, all members. Wendy Kaiser-Philander, alternate member. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Peter Johnson, member of SCOPA.
Good morning, colleagues. Basil Peters.
Thank you, members. I think that's all the members. And with us, of course, our procedural officer, Mr. Dustin Davids. I'm going to give to the minister and the department for introductions. Thank you. I think the minister has disappeared. I don't know. Is he here? Minister Simmons? Minister Simmons, you're on mute. Minister, we can't hear you. I think you are troubling with your device because it goes on mute and then unmute. While the minister is sorting that out, can we just get the department to introduce themselves?
Good morning, Chairperson. I'm Chantal Smith. I'm the head of department for the Department of Infrastructure. Myself and my team are sitting at one computer in the boardroom. You see it there, Shafira Andrews. I'm just going to ask the team to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shafira Andrews. I'm the Chief Director, Financial Management. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Pauline van der Merwe, Acting CFO, Department of Infrastructure.
Good morning, everybody. Brian Denton, Acting DDG, Human Settlements.
Good morning, David Ali, Planning Directorate.
Good morning, Sally Martin, Director, M&E.
Good morning, Bashir Rahim, Director, Financial Governance.
Thank you, Chair. Then we also have the Provincial Treasury here. So I'm going to hand over to Taryn to introduce herself and her team.
Good morning, all. Taryn van der Lier. I head Public Policy Services within the Treasury, and I'll hand over to my colleagues, Chad and Malcolm, who's also in the room.
Morning, all. My name is Chad Capon, Deputy Director, Provincial Government Budget Office.
Good morning, everybody. Malcolm Boyson, Fiscal Policy, Provincial Treasury.
Thank you, Chair. That's us.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for all the introductions. I'm going to allow Minister Simmons just to introduce himself and then also give us some introductory remarks, and then we will start. Over to you, Minister Simmons.
Firstly, Chair, good morning to everybody. Apologies, I was struggling with my volume, but thank you for affording me the opportunity. Chair, no, indeed, it is a privilege to brief the Public Accounts Committee on the challenges, but also the mechanisms that our department has put in place to avoid a reoccurrence thereof in terms of our annual targets, in terms of Program 2 and 4, which we are here to engage you on, but we do so fully understanding that the fiscus is no longer sufficient to deal with the infrastructure needs of our province, that semigration puts immense pressure on the existing infrastructure, and that our budget do not go proportional to the needs that we need to address, that we all do realize that there's never enough money to maintain what we have, as we're also expected to build new. Therefore, we have an ever-growing maintenance backlog in the infrastructure sector. It's therefore for this reason that we need to focus on partnerships. Hence, Provincial Treasury is also part of our presentation here today, but also with the private sector, other governments locally, but also internationally. But this also now asks and begs us to ask and to think differently on ways that we can ensure an infrastructure pipeline that helps to grow the economy, that attracts investment, creates jobs, but all the while also balancing the question of maintaining what we have and expanding what we need into the future. And we do find, and we do believe that the only way to do this is finding non-traditional financing instruments, strategic partnerships, but above all, agile delivery models as a department. But also we must learn from recent disasters and place, I believe, an emphasis on ecological infrastructure so that it takes its rightful place in the infrastructure ecosystem into the future as well. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister, for that. Thank you, Minister. We're going to do, I think we're going to do the three presentations and then we'll have questions after that. So the first section was, of course, on page 237 of the department. It was note 25 of program 2. The committee noted that the department spent 99% of the budget and only 44% was achieved in program 2. And then also on page 238, program 4, it was that the department spent 89% of the budget and only achieved 58% of the annual target. So that was program 4. And as the minister alluded to, we also noted in page 151 of the annual report that the committee noted that the infrastructure, there is a decay in the provincial immovable asset. And that was, of course, a great concern. And I know, as we know, there's insufficient capital and maintenance for these budgets. But what we as the committee want to know, what is the mechanisms put in place to navigate you through these stormy orders? HOD, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The presentation will be led by Bashir Rahim, and we will quickly just put the presentation on. If you can just give me an idea that you see it, please. Is it visible, Chair?
It's visible. It's visible.
Thank you.
Good morning, members of the Public Accounts Committee and colleagues who are around the table with me. In this presentation, just to latch on to the opening remarks of the chairperson, and that is that before I go and get into details of our presentation, it is always important to note that there's often an erroneous link made between spending 100% of our budget versus the achievement of targets in terms of the performance indicators. So I'd just like to put that as a caveat because there is no link and direct link between the two. Presentations on that issue has previously been done, and I can actually refer the members to that as a principal point. But moving on from there, in terms of the discussion today, just to look at what the brief was from the Public Accounts Committee, what was our situational context in which we produced this performance against the targets for 2023-24? What's our overall strategy to drive performance in the current in the year that's basically just passed and moving forward? We will deal a little bit more in detail about the actual non-achievement of targets in Program 2 and Program 4 and see where we are in the year that has just passed. And then, of course, the last bullet on that slide is about the alternative funding models, which is a separate presentation. So in terms of the brief from the Public Accounts Committee, this is just a copy from the letter that you've provided us with, which the chairperson has alluded to in his introduction. basically looking at the challenges of not meeting the annual targets in Program 2 and 4 and the mechanisms in place to avoid a recurrence of such a finding by the Auditor General. Of course, technically, it's not actually a finding by the Auditor General. It's more like they're just referencing something that already exists in the annual report. It's not something that was not public knowledge that they actually made reference to. Moving on to then the details of our presentation in terms of our situational context. So the question or the issue under discussion is our 2023-2024 performance, and those key performance indicators where the targets were not met. Now, firstly, of course, you do know that 2023-24 was the first year of the formation of the new Department of Infrastructure and that whole refresh impact thereon, of which you've had sufficient engagement on. But in that scenario, there was also internally the management arrangement whereby our strategy and finance units had to service two departments, infrastructure as well as mobility. You had one team basically doing all of this work over the first 6 months. Within the Directorate Performance Monitoring and Evaluation, we were undercapacitated. Our staff was cut down in terms of the numbers, and that impacted on our ability to adequately manage the performance as it was unfolding in the first year of DOI. All of that also in the background that when the 2023-24 APP targets were set, with the formation of the new department, of course, it was based on the best available information under the circumstances where we had competing priorities in terms of what we were trying to do to put the new department together. Therefore, we have to appreciate that it was a journey that started there. We've had substantial improvement, if I can say from the start of the presentation, we've had substantial improvement, but we do still have some challenges that we are working through, and you will see it coming through in the presentation. So in terms of the overall strategy, the moment the DOI started, then immediately we had a re-look at what our targets were. And therefore, in the very first year, in the 2023-24 year, we immediately applied for in-year changes being made to the APP targets. And that was based on the further information available as it unfolded when DOI actually started and we saw what our actual performance was. We also worked at capacitating our monitoring and evaluation unit internally. I've got some details there about that. And that has also started bearing fruit, but it's still in progress in terms of managing the performance in the second year, and now, of course, the third year is running. So after the dissolvement of the management arrangement, we were therefore able to then more closely focus on the DOI performance management, and this included improved data collection processes, internal communication with the line function in terms of how performance monitoring and evaluation is supposed to work internally, and to get better quality verification of the information that was reported, and also a deeper focus on target setting, making it more accurate in terms of what is a realistic expectation of performance. So this presentation then from here on basically is focusing on the impact of our overall strategy, what impact it's actually had on Program 2, which is Public Works, and Program 3, Program 4, which is Human Settlements. What we did was, in this presentation, we've actually gone back to the annual report and we've only extracted those indicators in Program 2 and Program 4 where the targets were not met, and then we are showing the situation in the current year in terms of the pre-audited figures, which the AG will still look at, but which have been verified or substantially verified by the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit. So in terms of Program 2, let me say from the start, in terms of Program 2, we've had five targets. There's 5 slides, basically 5 targets that were, on the face of it, not achieved, which we are discussing. and then we're showing the improvement in relation to that. So the first one is in relation to the designs, number of infrastructure designs ready for tender. In the prior year, there was an underachievement in this regard. That underachievement was particularly within the education infrastructure. So our designs ready for tender, of course, cuts across education infrastructure, health infrastructure in general. But the issue was that education infrastructure, they had their budgetary prioritization, which resulted in projects being placed on hold. And therefore, there was no achievement in that regard there. And this issue in relation to education infrastructure actually applies to 4 of the 5 targets that we actually did not achieve. So in the current year, what you actually see is you see everything on the right-hand side in terms of the variance. You see everything in green. Education infrastructure also green, but you might now ask, why we've actually got a target of 0 in the year that is just now passed. And that was when we set the APP for 24-25, there were no targets actually received from the Western Cape Education Department and put it in as a 0 by the time the APP was actually published. So what we ensured was that we were rather going to not include a target if we were not certain about the achievement thereof. So in the design indicator, that one has been turned around. It's been achieved. The next one in relation to the construction projects completed, basically the same story, and it's been achieved in the current year. The next one for the maintenance indicator, we've got 2 types of maintenance indicators. The one is for maintenance projects completed. So in this regard, in the prior year, we had two sections within the department that contributed to underachievement. One, of course, was education infrastructure, but the other was there was just one of the 25 projects within general infrastructure that was not achieved. And the issue there was contractor performance and loss of key staff. That actually impacted on both education and general infrastructure last year. In the current year, the education infrastructure is completely turned around. We've delivered 18 projects. But again, for a different reason within general infrastructure, we've also had the pre-audited figures show that there is going to be one underachievement over there. And that's a project delay, which is being managed in terms of normal contract management. Then the last indicator, or the second last indicator, that we're speaking about in program 2, which is the maintenance projects awarded. Again, the education impact, which I referred to, but we also last year had issues within general infrastructure, and that was due to client scope changes and budgetary prioritization. In the current year, we've got pre-audited figures show 5 projects underachieved in terms of maintenance projects awarded. And that, again, is being managed through contract management because the issue there was a professional service provider underperformance. And that's just being managed in terms of the normal contract management. The last issue in relation to program 2 was the immovable asset management. Here, we've got an indicator that speaks about the number of facilities that have been provided by the department. Now, the issue here has not actually been an underachievement, even though it looks like that, or the way the indicator is reported upon. The issue here was that during the year, the 23-24 year, we've had an internal change in terms of how our immovable assets register has been set up. Originally, it was set up in a very manual form using Excel spreadsheets, and that has now been digitalized into the eMerge system. So in that process of digitalization, those facilities that were accounted for in terms of certain numbers like 1,749, some of it has been consolidated. So it's actually the same number of facilities, but just the way it's recognized, it's actually recognized as fewer numbers. And therefore, the actual numbers recognized, which was shown in terms of our new digital eMerge system, the lower number was actually reported upon. So the issue really is that the target needs to be adjusted, but the substance of what was actually achieved is essentially the same. Then if we move on to human settlements, before I get to the detail of it, let me just say that human settlements, we've had 7 indicators in the previous year that on the face of it, where the targets were not achieved. In the current year, in terms of those 7 indicators, it needs to be noted that 3 of those indicators, though they are still in the APP in the current year, they have now been removed in the 25-26 year. So just to read this situation in that context. And then also, of those 7 that was underachieved last year, there's 1 where the indicator was actually consolidated, and therefore, the issue will effectively not apply in the 25-26 year. So what I'm saying is 7 indicators in human settlements previously was underachieved. 4 of it basically in terms of the fact that it's been removed going forward, is already not an issue. Now we're going to the details of what some of those were. There was the human settlements planning, the percentage of land acquired in previous financial years in 2014, 2019 within previously disadvantaged areas, that had to be rezoned. There was a target last year, basically there was a target of 20% and 0 was achieved, but all of that was actually beyond our control because we dependent there on the planning tribunals within the municipal spaces. In the current year, what we did in the in-year changes process was, current year means 24-25, in the in-year changes process, we actually reduced the target to 0. Because and the reason provided to DOTP in that regard was due to municipal delays, which is basically beyond our control. This indicator is one of it that has been removed in the 2025-26 APP. Then the next one coming from last year was the number of households that received subsidies through FLISP. There was an underachievement last year that has been completely turned around in the current year. The contribution towards that turnaround has been this partnership that our department has partnered with FNB, which basically gives an opportunity to those who have lost their properties due to economic hardship for them to be able to make this application for the subsidy. So this is a demand-driven indicator, and there's been a great interest in this area, and therefore we see that good turnaround. There's 332 additional subsidies which was made available, provided in relation to what our target was. The next one in terms of implementation side of human settlements regarding the BNGs, which is the breaking new ground houses delivered in the previous year, we had an underachievement. That was due to procurement delays and the relocation of beneficiaries. However, in the current year, we've actually got essentially got a bigger underachievement. So this is one of those where the performance still continues to be managed into the new year. Impacting on this, which is not included in the slide, important point actually that in the last minute we somehow through editing it was removed. But the important overall rider in relation to this performance is to remember the 300 million rand reduction in the allocation in this regard. That, of course, directly impacts on the delivery of breaking new ground houses. But over and above that contributing factor, there's the issue of performance of contractors. There was severe weather conditions, and then there was some of the units that have been complete, but they can't be signed off because electrical, for example, is still outstanding, etc. Now, in terms of the departmental strategy, the department is driving stronger contract management, consequence management on projects for non-performing contractors, and flagging service providers if their performance was poor, etc., and reporting all of this to the provincial treasury, and also ensuring that when we are seeing poor performance in the pipeline, that we're trying to take faster intervention, on those projects that are moving slowly. Then on the next one, which is number of service sites delivered, this one we've had a complete turnaround in this regard. In the previous year, we had an underachievement. In the current year, we've got an overachievement, but also a fourfold increase in delivery. So the previous year, the target was 1,000 service sites delivered. This year, the target was 4,300. So you wonder why that is the case, but it's the nature of these large projects that they actually only signed off after all sites in a particular phase are actually signed off. Then it's actually recognized in terms of the way we report upon it. There were a number of projects. We've actually got some of the details there in the slide. I'm not going to go through all of it, but just to mention that there's a number of projects in the 23-24 year which had serious delays, and those are all unlocked and basically recognized in this current year. Some of the details are actually there, and then some of those projects were also accelerated for delivery, all of which contributed to a positive turnaround in this. I think that this indicator, together with the previous one on the breaking new ground, should actually be read together to get an appreciation, because once service sites are delivered, that can also contribute towards the possibility of breaking new ground houses in the future. Okay, then the next one is human settlements implementation. Also, the percentage of investment of the total allocation in previously disadvantaged areas. This one we've had a turnaround of a positive 9% in the current year. However, it's again a story of rollover of projects that were not complete in the prior year are actually complete in the current year, and therefore that also contributes towards this positive turnaround. Noting that this indicator is also one of those indicators that has now been dropped in the 25-26 year. Then the next one is the percentage of amount spent on designated groups, particularly women. In the prior year, there was the underachievement. In the current year, we don't have the final figures yet. We are still verifying those final figures internally. However, I can say on behalf of the department does have and did have a strategy in place for the year under review to ensure that this 10% target is achievable. That strategy was that those companies with female ownership, with 100% female ownership, that the target was actually set that 7.5% should actually somehow be made available to them. And those companies with more than 50% female ownership, that a 4.8% target was set. Combined, these two numbers would contribute to the possibility of achieving a 10% performance in that regard. We've got processes in place in terms of, before projects commence, those projects are more than 10 million rand to the empowerment impact assessment, etc., which contributes to ensure that we are able to say before the time whether what's the maximum number of opportunities that can actually be made available in a particular area. Be that as it may, in the 25-26 year, this indicator has also been dropped from the APP. Last one in terms of the presentation in relation to the title deeds. Title deeds is something. The delivery of historical title deeds has been a very important issue. So the title deeds, to make sure that National was able to keep tabs on the fact that title deeds across the different periods from pre-1994 until date, that the same or similar amount of effort was actually given to the delivery thereof. They divided the title deeds indicator into four categories. The one that was underachieved in the prior year was in that category of the 1994, post-1994 until 2014. And there was an explanation in the prior year in that regard why it was underachieved, but in the current year there's a different reason for that, and that is unresolved issues with regard to township establishment processes. However, the important note at the bottom there is that, be that as it may, that these different categories are shown as such in the annual report, the totality of title deeds delivered is actually 5,000. Basically more than was actually the target for the entire four categories. So there's a great turnaround in that regard, and also a National Department of Human Settlements has now collapsed the recognition or the reporting of the performance for title deed delivery into one indicator. So whether it's before 1994 or any other period in time, it's all going to be reported upon in the 25-26 year in one category. But be that as it may, given the sensitivities to delivering title deeds in relation to historical backlog, our department has still assisted municipalities to ensure that in their 5-year strategic plan, that they've actually got a plan in place to deliver on those title deeds in this period in which there was underachievement. So the concluding point on this is that title deeds will still be reported upon, but as one category, not broken up into the 4 categories. So that really is the details of my presentation in terms of our turnaround, where we are and what we are still challenged with. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bashir. Chair, do you want us to move on to the PT presentation, or do you want us to pause for questions?
Actually, I think you can move on and then we'll have the questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. The next presentation is going to be done by the Provincial Treasury, and they're just going to brief you on the framework for alternative and blended finance, after which we will then talk specifically about our alternative models for infrastructure financing.
Good morning, everyone. Just putting it in presentation mode. Please confirm it's visible to everyone.
It's visible and we can hear you. You may go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just a little bit of background. So leading up to the launch of our alternative and blended finance framework, the Ministry of Finance had quite extensive engagements with a range of institutions, both financial development finance institutions, some consular generals, commercial finance institutions. So these are just some of those completed engagements which were held prior to the 30th of April, where we launched our framework. You can see here institutions such as the World Bank are covered, German Development Bank or KfW as it's known, and several others that we engaged with. I don't want to spend too much time on this. The next slide is also around, during this process, the Ministry and Treasury looked at where are the particular sources of finance that we could harness. So your big 4 banks commercially, those are potential sources. Again, certain international development finance institutions, some asset management firms. An example is 91 Asset Management, and then local development finance institutions like the DBSA. And just to emphasize that these really are not, there's no particular choice or preference for these. These are just examples of entities that were met with to really sound out the market and understand what the market is thinking, what it's looking for, and what its appetite is at the moment around alternative and blended finance and working with the public sector. So then moving on to the launch itself, where we launched the framework, which I'm shortly going to present on. This was an extremely successful event. We had about 60 attendees, including a range of Western Cape government officials as well as external stakeholders. I think we had majority external stakeholders. Some of those key external stakeholders who were present were representatives from the 4 large financial institutions in South Africa, key academic institutions, UCT and Graduate School of Business was in attendance, several consular generals, and then also local and international development finance institutions, very similar to the list that I think Ministry actually consulted with prior to the launch. What we've noticed and what we've seen, and we're glad this has happened, is that after the launch, it really generated significant interest, and we've received a lot of enthusiasm and commitment to kind of keep going on with collaboration with these stakeholders. And the next steps is that we're having fruitful ongoing conversations with several of those stakeholders to explore those partnerships and opportunities further. And this looks like engaging with DOI as well around the pipeline and the bankable portfolio of projects, which are an outcome of the Western Cape Infrastructure Implementation Plan. And those conversations are ongoing and are bearing fruit and seem to be moving. So now, Chair, I think what I'm going to do is really get into what is the alternative and blended finance framework, and how does it speak to this agenda item of enabling a blended and alternative finance mechanisms to assist in this funding gap that we find ourselves having with infrastructure. So I just want to set out from the beginning what these are. So really a definition, and then also why is a framework needed. So you have different sources of alternative finance, and really what we're saying alternative finance is, it's not something, it doesn't equal exotic finance. It's just that it's non-traditional finance that plugs funding gaps. And there's different forms of finance that form part of this. So you've got public finance, which we are all quite familiar with, private finance, which is essentially private credit lines and private commercial institutions, project finance, which is a way of funding particular projects, potentially through special purpose vehicles. And then finally, there's concessional finance, which usually comes through development finance institutions, and that's usually at a lower lending rate, so lower interest rate, and has sometimes got grace periods or extended, it turns into patient capital. The payment periods can be negotiated. And then what is blended finance, which is the focus, because we are a government and we want to blend our public and our private financing and development finance, and that's what blended finance is. So here I just want to read this definition. Blended finance is the combination of catalytic capital from public or philanthropic sources with private development and multilateral financing. And really what it is, the point of it is to increase investment in public goods and services, i.e. infrastructure. Drive sustainable development and share the risk, so that the private sector is managing the risk that it's best suited to, and that the government is managing the risk that it's best suited to. So definitions out the way. Why is a framework needed to guide these this process? Well, first of all, we acknowledge that there's a constrained fiscal space, rising service delivery demand, and infrastructure backlogs, and this has led the Western Cape government to seek alternative and blended finance. But we want to do this in an organized, structured way. That's where this framework comes in. So it gives every Western Cape department a single legally anchored guideline for identifying projects and selecting the right instrument, sharing that risk prudently with the private, public, and philanthropic sectors, and unlocking new money or new capital without jeopardizing our fiscal sustainability and our budget policy principles. So really what the framework objective is to accelerate socioeconomic development while staying within the bounds of the specific legislation around the PFMA and the Borrowing Powers of Provincial Government Act. Now, to put this alternative blended finance framework in context, if you will permit, Chair, I'll just say ABF framework in future just to save us some time and my tongue. So where does this fit in? So really, we start with our APEX priorities, and you'll be familiar with what those are. Our PSP, the Growth for Jobs Strategy, the Western Cape Infrastructure Framework, and its strategy and implementation plan are also included in that. And those go down into the portfolios that we are familiar with the PSP. And what we're saying here is that the ABF framework is integrated into the Western Cape's long-term development planning ecosystem. It's not bolted on. It's not something that we bolted on and we've got a list of projects that may or may not happen. Those projects are integrated into our policy environment and our policy imperatives. And so what this framework aims to do, if we look at the bottom left of the slide here, is to say we have the government fiscus. We want to now supplement this with alternative and blended finance, and that looks like private sector finance. It could be loans, concessional finance from DFIs, and that's DBSA or international. Then you have your charities and your philanthropic organizations, and another source of capital, which is the impact investors who impact for return, but also for social impact. This equals alternative blended finance. And what this framework tries to do is guide departments on how to mobilize these new sources of capital, whilst obviously maintaining within all of the requirements that are set out by the legislation I referenced earlier. So what the framework has done is it's looked at key blended finance instruments that are available and that are most likely to be used. And it's categorized them into two major categories: off-balance sheet instruments and on-balance sheet instruments. And this is important because an off-balance sheet instrument will have very different reporting and risk requirements to an on-balance sheet instrument. And just to clarify the two, when we say on-balance sheet instrument, this is where the funding or the liability is taken directly onto Western Cape Government's balance sheet. When it's an off-balance sheet instrument, the financing is raised at a project level, so that was project finance, or by a third party with no or limited recourse to the government's actual balance sheet. So that's what we're talking about here. So for example, an outcomes-based funding or financing model, where you pay as a government for an outcome once it's achieved, it doesn't have any impact on the actual balance sheet of a government or a government department, whereas a loan would. So if we're taking out a loan, then that would go onto our balance sheet as a liability. Okay. So the framework looks at the 5 key sectors of the Western Cape government, and this aligns to the Western Cape infrastructure framework. And what it's done, the framework has said, well, what are some of the best fit blended finance instruments for these sectors? So this is essentially not a prescriptive list. This is just some of the instruments we think that are best suited to deliver and to finance projects in these various sectors. So for example, in the social sector, you have social outcomes bonds, or social impact bonds rather, sorry, or social outcomes funds. In the economic sector, you have senior debt and issuance for projects with low to moderate risks. In the ecological sector, we have investment and donor grants. So that's viability gap funding, which is essentially saying that it's just a little bit of funding that needs to be put in place in order for this to be commercially viable. And that's an instrument that we can use. So this ABF framework provides departments with clear options to match these instruments to specific projects. Now, all of these instruments will be project specific, and the sort of negotiations around those are project specific. So it's sort of the nature of finance, and fortunately or unfortunately. And then finally, what we're aiming to do with this framework is to provide departments with a versatile toolkit that balances innovation and fiscal discipline to meet the diverse project demands that are we know going to come as each project is unique. So a big part of this framework is it relies on a pipeline of projects. You know, we can do all we can to set up the framework, the enabling environment, and that is very much what this framework does. But we also need to have projects that investors want to actually invest in. So this is where we've integrated with the Western Cape Infrastructure Framework and done work with the DOI to integrate our processes so that a continuous pipeline of viable projects spanning social programs, not just infrastructure, and infrastructure initiatives suitable for ABF are actually going to come through. So the way this happens is that departments will be required to submit potential ABF projects through the planning and budgeting process into a central project pipeline database, which will be complemented by the department's public entities infrastructure planning documents. So it's not just the pipeline, but we also look at the existing infrastructure planning documents, which we know our departments already have. All non-infrastructure related projects go through a relevant policy steering committee and then to Provincial Treasury. And finally, the ABF framework provides guidance to departments on preparing and implementing a new ABF project. So, and having it registered in the ABF pipeline, and on the process for projects in existing pipelines. So this is just to say there might be existing projects that have got to a certain stage in the pipeline, but actually we realize they're suitable for alternative blended finance. And we don't want to overhaul and redo those, every single one of the, the whole feasibility study or the business case. We want to adapt it so that it accounts for alternative blended finance stakeholders and investors. So with this in mind, the pipeline development process, what we next go into is the ABF project process. So this is essentially almost similar to your IDMS stage gates, but actually it's alongside that, and IDMS has been integrated into that. IDMS being the infrastructure delivery management system, which is a mandate of national government. So really what this is showing is that we want our departments to be the originators of the projects. They know their businesses best. They identify the projects. They take those projects through their own internal departmental screening. Once that's been approved, it goes for pre-feasibility and concept development. So we flesh that concept out a bit more, that project. And then we decide, okay, well, given this project, given how we think what it entails, is the conceptualized instrument to fund this project on or off balance sheet? And this is a key part of our project process, because we don't want there to be any misunderstanding that, you know, the following steps 1 through sort of 4 to 14 are necessary for every project. We're not putting up more red tape. Really, why it's important to distinguish, is this on or off balance sheet, is because if it is off balance sheet, as many of the initiatives our departments have already undertaken, then you don't have to go through further approval processes, because it doesn't actually have an on-balance, it doesn't have an implication for our balance sheet, and therefore it doesn't need to be approved by the National Loans Coordination Committee, which is eventually where any loan that the province takes has to end up. So just to say that most of the projects and all off-balance sheet instruments will go through these steps, but not necessarily the next steps. So now, if the project is an on-balance sheet instrument, it requires an on-balance sheet instrument to finance it, then we obtain in-principle support. So that's potentially from PTM, etc. And you commission a full feasibility study. So this would be actually going, okay, we need more detail on this, we need more information. That feasibility study is then reviewed by Provincial Treasury. And then there's a process of the transaction structuring. Now, this in the past and across the board and around the world is one of the most it takes the longest time. This is really where the deal is structured, the agreements are made, how is the risk going to be shared, and this can take quite a long time. But once this is done, then we move to approvals for procurement launch, or we sign the loans term agreement. And what you'll see, Chair and members, is that throughout we're seeing these little bubbles, phase 1, phase 2. That's the budget process. So we've integrated this process into our existing budget process. And I'm going to talk through that now in the next slide. So really what we have here is, okay, stages 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the ABF project development process. Those line up with phase 1 of our budget process, which is evidence-based planning. Phase 2, so that's mitigating in-year fiscal risks, the adjustments budget process. Those are actually lined up with steps 5 and 6 of the ABF project process. And then we skip to the final phase, which is our finalizing of the budget. And there what you'll see is, I mentioned how the transaction structuring step can take quite a long time. So they're not linearly integrated in terms of time, because the provincial budget process is set. These things happen every year. They happen in the same way, but a project, you know, it can take 2 years to complete step 7 or 4 years. So only once the step 7, the transaction structuring, is complete, does that ABF project then re-enter the budget process and get approved or not approved. And so that is what this slide wants to show, just that we've thought about how does this integrate into the existing MTEF and MTech process. Then finally, Chair, how is this governed? How is this governed? So what we really have tried to do with this framework is that our institutional roles and governance structures aim to match strong central oversight with decentralized project origination and execution. So giving our departments the flexibility to innovate, not burdening them with red tape, not telling them their business. They know that the best. We want to enable that, and we want to ensure that that is governed well, as our mandate dictates. So the specific roles and responsibilities of each one of these tiers, as you see in the graphic on the left, is detailed in the ABF framework, which we can share with the committee post this meeting. And if I may, Chair, just briefly take us through this, maybe using the metaphor of what it takes to take a plane off the ground and land it again. Our line departments are really the pilots. The provincial treasury is the control tower, and then your PLCC and TPLCC is your traffic control. Really the strategic, where you're going, how you're going, are you on course, are you doing what you need to, and then your cabinet is really approving that. So almost like the regulators or the FAA of this. And finally, when it's an on-balance sheet instrument, your National Treasury and your National Minister of Finance have to approve any loan the province takes out according to the Provincial Borrowing Powers Act. And that's why they're on that outer rim of the circle for final loan approval and auditing. And just to then say, how we've integrated with the current infrastructure management or governance structures is that the Infrastructure Ministerial Committee, the IMC, will integrate where necessary on specific infrastructure ABF projects at the cabinet level. And also where it's a non-infrastructure project, those will come through and be governed and coordinated by the Innovation, Culture and Governance Ministerial Committee. And finally, Chair, to kind of go back down the rung of hierarchy, coordination between the Municipal Loans Coordination Committee and the Technical Provincial Loans Coordination Committee to ensure integration through the municipal and provincial alignment. So we understand that a lot of infrastructure, really, it lands in the municipal space. And to ensure there's integration there, we have set up this structure between the MLCC and the TPLCC to ensure that there is alignment and coherency between those projects. And that is the end of my presentation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It is two detailed presentations and a lot to digest, but I'm just going to give the members opportunity to ask some questions. If there's any questions from the members, I just want to see if I see any hands. Member Van Minnen, I see Member Van Minnen. Is there any other hands? Member Van Minnen, I think you can go ahead and then we will see if there's more hands. Over to you, Member Van Minnen.
Thank you very much. My question is on the first transfer, the first presentation to Mr. Andrews. He talked about title deeds. I've always found title deed delivery to be a very misleading indicator because a title deed merely reflects the situation in the deeds office. What really matters is when the transfer takes place into the ownership of the recipient. That's the deeds office. Title deeds, as an indicator, to be honest, really only indicate the efficiency of the deeds office in generating those title deeds, not transfer of ownership. My question is, I think the focus on title deeds is slightly obscuring what's really going on, because Mr. Andrews was talking about township subdivision. Do we have a situation where people are taking occupation of houses where that township subdivision has not yet taken place? So essentially they're all on an undivided earth. So my question is really, rather than title deed delivery, what is actually happening in terms of the subdivision, in terms of the actual individual earths, and do we have a backlog of that? Because that would be a far more interesting indicator, because it would actually indicate what is genuinely happening with land ownership. If we could just have a response on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Van Minnen. Member Pat Lekker.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning once again. Let me take this opportunity, Chair, to welcome the presentations that has been presented before us. Chair, I have a question, I think, on the first presentation that was made in relation to the targets on maintenance. where it says the target was 83, 69 was achieved, and then there was the 14, which was a balance that was not achieved and later achieved. Therefore, Chair, I want to ask, there was mentioning of contractor performance as the reason why those maintenance targets were not achieved, or maintenance indicator targets. And therefore, Chair, maybe I want to know, first, do we have a list of those companies or contractors that are said to have had issues in terms of completing their targets? Then, Chair, to that question would be, what are these performance areas that could not be completed timeously? If we can get details of such. And then, Chair, on the issue of infrastructure designs, we hear that maybe part of it was the fact that at first, because this was a new department, they were part of this department which have now been removed, of which maybe I'm subject to correction. I did not capture this correctly, but I want to understand in terms of the infrastructure designs and the announcement of the tender processes. What is a normal process in terms of saying we are now ready for tender? Do we announce the dates before designs are finalized, completed, and funds are attached to it? What is the process that is being undertaken? I'm asking this so that tomorrow I get to understand when we have issues with infrastructure designs, even if it's not within this department, but we get to understand what could have been the process to be followed. And maybe lastly, Chair, my question would be on the implementation side for BNG, the procurement delays that were mentioned in this regard.
You are now on mute, Member Lecker. You are now on mute.
Oh, my apologies, Chair.
Okay.
Okay. Then, Chair, the issue on the procurement delays around the implementation side of the BNG, I want to understand what were these procurement delays, and would these procurement delays have led to the 300 million that could not be completed or used optimally by the municipalities? So if I can get an explanation about those procurement delays. And lastly on that would be, up until the process was finalized or is finalized, how many BNG units have since been completed? And maybe the last one, the very last one, Chair, would be around the Sustainable Development Service Delivery Demands. Can we get to an understanding that this process will actually eventually lead to a proper oversight to enable all government departments to do what is supposed to be done by all spheres? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. HOD, I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'm going to allow the next set of questions. If you can maybe just answer or get somebody to then the presenter to answer. Thank you, HOD.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say the third part of the presentation you didn't allow me to make, but that aside, let's first answer the questions. The first one is, I'm going to ask Brian just to respond to title deeds, but then I want to first explain the context of the education infrastructure targets across design, construction, and delivery, the procurement process. What happened in the education space is for the last 2 financial years, just first let me take a step back and say, for all the new members, the Department of Infrastructure, the then Department of Transport and Public Works, the previous one, and the DOI as it is now, renders implementation of infrastructure services to the Department of Education and to the Department of Health. What has changed in 2023 is that there was a resolution, a cabinet resolution, granting the Department of Education and the Department of Health the ability to procure and or assign their delivery of infrastructure to any implementing agent or to refuse to assign it to some implementing agents. The way in which they would assign work is through what is called an IPMP, and it stands for the Infrastructure Management Program of that particular department. In other words, that particular minister and their HOD would send a letter, a document, strategic document, a plan to my department and my minister saying, this is what we would like DOI to implement on behalf of education and or health. We would take that, allocate resources to it, do preliminary budgets for it, and that plan that we then submit back to them is called the IPIP, which is the implementation plan. That document also would say, if we do this work in accordance with the control budget that you say is available, then the targets that you are about to set should be the following based on what is affordable per project. Then we would agree these would be the indicators, remembering that the indicators and the targets as their descriptions are there is set at a national level. The same goes for human settlements. We're talking about national indicators and targets. In the case of education, by the time that the APP, the Annual Performance Plan, the Strategic Plan, the EPWP targets were set, we received no IPMP. In other words, no program, no plan, not having an idea even from a draft of what education wanted us to do. The response that the Department of Transport and Public Works and then the subsequent Department of Infrastructure took is to say, in that case, the IPIP can only be the implementation of the current projects that we had flowing from previous IPMPs, which is what we then have. And therefore, you see that disjuncture in accordance to the targets versus the achievements specifically for education. In relation to general infrastructure, I will ask Bashir to respond to some of your questions because that is completely within our control because general infrastructure is the implementer for the immovable asset management component that sits within the Department of Infrastructure. So for that, I will ask Bashir to answer. Then the last question that tries to make a link between the 300 million that was cut by National and the BNGs. These things have nothing to do with each other. First, let me clarify that the BNGs and the delay in procurement that we're talking about here is basically municipal delays. Because remember, from the total grant, approximately 80% of that is delivered through municipalities. Municipalities sit with an issue that if they cannot link their projects to a budget, if National cuts a budget or threaten to cut a budget, and we can't provide the assurance to a municipality, then they can't procure. They can also not procure saying, okay, maybe we will get a budget for this. If they cannot link it, the budget to procurement, then there will be a delay. They can't do it. In the case of the 300 million, I just want to reiterate, we never understand anything. When that money was removed, we were sitting at that point with in excess of 240 million rand worth of invoices, that we did receive before we had to stop receiving invoices. Because remember, we were sitting with invoices, no money, which was promised we would get and for which we had the authority in terms of the signed adjustments budget plan. And now we can't pay it, which also means it's a risk from an audit point of view, from a 30-day payment point of view for human settlements. So these two things really isn't related to each other. I'm going to ask Brian to just respond to the title deeds question and Bashir then to the general infrastructure question around the targets on maintenance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member van Minden. Yes, regarding the title deeds, the approved beneficiaries are in occupation of these houses. And these houses were built under the, at the time we had a land availability agreement with the owners of the property, and in most cases it's national departments. So yes, we are struggling. And over and above the national departments, we also have the historic Act 9 areas. An example of that is Genatendal and those areas, where we are still battling to get the property transferred so that a simultaneous transfer can take place from national to the provincial and ultimately to the beneficiary. But I think also just to latch on that, you know, the problem doesn't end there. Because of the time that has elapsed, there are many of these persons have moved on. So it's not just a straightforward of transferring the property, but also going back to that property and regularize who's actually now in that property. So it is not as straightforward as a transfer, but there's a lot of beneficiary administrative issues also involved in trying to regularize the transfer of the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Bashir?
On the question of the maintenance, planned maintenance projects completed for the underperformance. So the one question was about who the contractors were and what was the actual areas of underperformance. We'll have to pull that information. I don't have it handy with me, but we can pull the details of it and actually provide it to the committee afterwards.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, HOD. Members, is there follow-ups on those questions? Or can we go? Okay, I see a member van Minden. You got a follow-up, member van Minden. Over to you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, that's even more of a concern. So it's, in a way, it's deeply unfair to use title deed delivery as an indicator of performance when the problem is actually not sitting with the department to resolve. It's sitting with other national departments, it's sitting with landowners, it's sitting with the deeds office, it's sitting with subdivision issues. And of course, as has been pointed out, and I mean, we also know this across the country, there are a lot of informal secondary sales that take place for cash without being in writing, without having the proper documentation. So you have people who frankly are in occupation of houses that have been sold by the rightful beneficiaries that it's going to be extremely difficult to regularize. So what it really indicates is we need to have a look at that entire land transfer process right from the original owner to be able to determine how people actually eventually get ownership of B&G housing, because we're actually just essentially saving up a massive problem that at some point in the future, we're going to have to do some very serious work to try to regularize. And I'm just concerned, particularly in the Western Cape, that certainly the National Department would continue to say that performance isn't happening, but in fact, the measurement they're using to determine performance is not actually fit for purpose. And I think we need to bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a comment on that, HOD, or can we move on?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is. We fully agree with that statement. We do sit around the table when the annual targets are set nationally as a sector. We have fought this issue. We are doing the work, the exact work that the member is referring to. But of course, it doesn't suit all departments provincially or nationally to look at it in this way. And what we are trying to do is to resolve the problem at the core. And we completely agree. We have fought this issue also with the Auditor General, and it is a conversation that we are constantly having from a policy point of view as well as from a monitoring and performance point of view when we sit with our national colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. Is there other questions? I just want to ask the question to PT. That was quite a very detailed presentation by PT. All that I want to know, the alternative blended finance framework, and the General was talking about plugging the funding gaps. Now, if we look at the question we have posed is the decay in the provincial immovable properties, and that is our major concerns. So do you think with these alternative blended finance framework, we'll be able to service these assets that's decaying and, you know, look after the assets because of the insufficient funds that we have when it comes to budget allocations? Do you think that will bridge that gap? Is there any other questions, members? PT, you can answer.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the issue of how to fund maintenance projects is a more complicated matter. I think project finances and institutions are more used to and more willing to to finance new infrastructure, especially infrastructure that has revenue generation potential. There are models that we have seen on how essentially financiers are interested in financing infrastructure. The main thing, and I think my colleagues at DOI could also comment on this, is when you pool that maintenance together into a mega maintenance or mega infrastructure maintenance project, you achieve some economies of scale, but you also achieve risk sharing across those maintenance projects, and that's where you can get alternative and blended finance in for maintenance. So it's not impossible, Chair, but it is something that is difficult and is not as common. The other option, and this is where we think what might happen, is as we get more funding and financing, obviously dependent on external finances and stakeholders' interests, but what that means is that the funding that was put aside for new infrastructure can now actually be sourced externally, and that funding that was for new infrastructure can be shifted to maintenance of infrastructure, and so open up more funding from PT for maintenance of infrastructure. Chair, that's my kind of answer, but we can talk a bit more about this internally and submit something to committee at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, is there other questions pertaining to these presentations we received? I don't see any hands. If there's no hands, I'm going to... HOD, before I ask the Minister for concluding remarks, is there anything that you need to, that you want to comment on, the HOD, before I give the Minister opportunity?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe just to say thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you also for the questions. You've given us some food for thought, and definitely also for some of the comments, because it's exactly the way in which we approach and think about the annual indicators. And then I also want to say thank you to the Provincial Treasury for being willing, Chair, to come with us to this SCOPA session. Because we are working together, and like they're saying, what we are trying to do is have one singular infrastructure pipeline so that we have one view of what the infrastructure asset base of the Western Cape looks like, what it is that we can afford to do, what we can't afford to do, and how do we need to approach it to find new money. Because the emphasis here is on new money, and therefore my ministerial priorities from a partnering point of view, and with that we don't mean traditional PPPs. We're talking about partnering with the private sector, with farmers, with developers, with contractors, with other governments, in order for us to see how do we address the ever-growing need for infrastructure solutions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, HOD. Minister, I see you're still with us. Do you want to do some concluding remarks, Minister Simmons?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to your members for the comments and questions. I think it's quite insightful, but I think the fact that we are focusing on partnership as a department, and evidence of that is Provincial Treasury, one of our internal partners, being with us in today's session, should tell you that the way in which the Department of Infrastructure is heading, similarly like the rest of the provincial departments will seek to be heading, is to partner to shape that Western Cape of the future. But we also are well aware that we need to maintain what we have. It's to find the perfect balance in terms of the various blended financing models to maintain what we have, but also shape the future through the investment that's needed to actually see that realize in the future. So we are be looking forward to follow-up sessions with you, Chair and Committee, because infrastructure is not stagnant. It's moving, it's long-term, but above all, it's also shaping a future which, at this stage in the Western Cape, we have a clear plan through partnership internally and externally. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister. No, I think the committee, I'll speak on behalf of the committee, but we'll do some resolutions afterwards. Just the mechanisms that the department has put into place to mitigate, these shortcomings. It's already, and I know when it comes to the annual reports, we will have good reports because you have put processes in place to have a turnaround, and we can see it on the charts presented and so on. So thank you very much, Minister and the H&D and the department, and PT. You will be excused now. The members will stay behind for resolutions. Thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Members, we're now going to have opportunity. I'm just going to ask Mr. Davids just to read out what he has captured, and then if you want to add to that, we can do that. I'm just going to hand over to Mr. Davids to give us what he has captured. Over to you, Mr. Davids. We can't hear you. I'm the only one that can't hear you. I can't hear you. Can anybody else hear him?
No,
we
I can't hear
can't.
him either.
We can't. He's not on mute. He's unmuted himself, but we can't hear you.
Earth calling Mr. Davids.
I think it's a similar thing that normally happens from my work laptop, where you hear people and then you're surprised that they can't hear you.
He just went out. I think he's going to come back in now. I think he just went out quickly. I think he'll rejoin us now. Just to say that we're just going to do the resolutions. We're not going to do the minutes. Is going to stand over. Minutes going to stand over to our next meeting, and then we must just do the resolutions, and then we're done. You're back, Mr. Dustin Davids. Oh my word! Still can't hear you. Members, I can't hear you, him. Is there any resolutions? I suggest if we maybe just want to mention the resolutions that you have, and then he can just jot it down. But we can't hear you at all. We can't hear you at all. Members?
Hi, Chair. Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you now.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Sorry, Chair.
Yeah,
I had to run around for earphones here.
Go ahead.
The laptop just went. Sorry, Chair. Chair, honourable members, through you, Chair, I've jotted down two requests for documentation, and then there's a resolution as well. So the two requests for documentation is a list of the companies that could not deliver on the target setting of the department. Regarding the targets on maintenance indicated, Chair, and then as well, Chair, the ABF, the Alternative Business Framework Model, the department indicated that they can forward the committee that as well, Chairperson, and then Chair, with the transfers of land, Member Van Binnen actually indicated that maybe the department should look long term on how that can be effectively done, Chairperson. So perhaps just a letter maybe to the Minister, Chair, from yourself on behalf of the committee to just ask them maybe for quarterly updates on this matter, Chair, of the lands transfer compared to the title deed delivery transfer.
Thank you. Member Van Minnen, are you happy with that?
Yes, just to clarify, what one's interested in is the actual transfer process, transfer of ownership as happens in the deeds office vis-a-vis title deed delivery. Because I think that the real problem is actually lying in the fact that land is not being transferred. Well, firstly, it's not being subdivided, and then it's not, because it isn't subdivided, it's not being transferred to the new beneficiaries. So it's still, for example, you'll have an entire development that will still be on undivided earth belonging to, for example, the Ministry of Defence, which means that the people who could be living on that property for 5 or 10 or 15 years don't yet have ownership of the individual units, which of course limits all kinds of economic opportunities. So one really wants to know what's happening in the deeds office in terms of transfers and what the delays are to those transfers, if that makes sense.
Got it, Member. Got it, Chairperson.
Thank you. Member Pet Lecker, your information that you needed, are you covered?
The only thing that Mr. Davids did not mention were the areas of non-performance, Chair.
Chair, the areas of non-performance, Chair, in what?
The contractors that did not perform.
Yes, Chair. So
maintenance.
I've actually got that as a request for information, Chair.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Member Peter Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to use this opportunity to inform the members of SCOPA that Provincial Treasury will be briefing the Finance Committee next week in more detail with regards to the alternative and blended financing, should anyone be interested in that. So I don't think we need to do any sort of request for more information on that for SCOPA, just to save them the double work as well. Thanks.
No problem. I think that's, thank you, Member Peter Johnson. Member Basil Petrus, your hand is up.
Good morning, Chair and colleagues again. Chairperson, there's municipalities who don't give their full cooperation in the rollout of housing projects, and that have an influence on our performance in the province as well. So what are we going to do about that, municipalities? Is there a way that we can monitor that or intervene there?
Thank you very much, Member Peters. I don't think we can intervene, but we can ask the department to give us, updates on a quarterly basis, or we can engage with the Standing Committee on Local Government and just, maybe call a joint meeting with them if we need to do that. But I think we've got an oversight role. So if we believe that, municipalities are not playing their role, one, we can maybe have a joint meeting with them, with the Standing Committee, or secondly, we can just ask the department for quarterly updates to keep us abreast. Members, is that the thinking around it? I'm handing it over to you. I think that is my two suggestions. Either we ask the department to give us, feedback on a quarterly basis, or we ask, if it's a recurring problem, that we maybe engage the chairperson of local government, and we maybe have a joint session on that, calling in the problems that you are saying that the municipality is not playing their part. Mr. Davids, over to you.
Chairperson, I have got that down, Chairperson. It's just for the committee to decide which alternative they're going to take, Chair, as you suggested. Are we going to ask for a quarterly report, or will we do a briefing session with a joint committee chair briefing session?
Yeah, members, I'm going to give it to you, Member Basil Peters. Your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. Both are actually good proposals. So I will go with the one that we have the joint meeting or session, briefing session.
Other members, for any comments? Other members? I don't see any hands. I'll have a discussion with the chairperson of local government. We'll draft a letter, Mr. Davids, and just take it forward
Yes,
from
Chair.
there. I think Member Peters got a valid point. I think we can't leave it like that. Members, is there any other, Mr. Davids, are we done? When you were out of the meeting, I said the minutes will stand over to the next meeting.
Yes, thank
So
you,
I
Chair.
dealt with that. Is there any other thing on the agenda? Nothing else, eh?
Nothing else, Chairperson.
Thank
It's
you.
just
Members,
our next meeting, Chair.
excuse me?
It's just the next meeting that we will have in June, Chair.
Okay, and that will get notice.
Yes.
Mr. Davids, I know it's the problem that I had this morning, and I didn't want to bring it up, is, if we get the presentation so late,
Yes.
and maybe you will just have to sit on some of the departments to give it that the members can at least read through the presentation.
Yes.
I know I signed the document, so you do send out quite in advance. And I see it's not just this department, but that we get presentations at the last moment. And that is very difficult to follow when you have not read through the documents. So maybe we can just make work of that and give them maybe just a cutoff when we
Yes, Chair.
get the documents in order to give it to the members to familiarize themselves before we, have the meeting.
Yes, Chair, in the letters of invite, and we normally give the department, as you know, Chair, the departments or the entities a day before the committee meeting to supply the committee by noon the prior day. But Chairperson, for the upcoming meeting, Chairperson, I have already engaged with the departments for our upcoming meetings up until August. So they are aware, Chairperson, of when is the estimated cutoff, Chair, and so that we can at least have it a week before the time for the committee members to peruse all the documents, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that proactive step that you took there. But we can discuss it afterwards.
Yes.
But like this morning, you can't go through the documents if you're in a meeting already.
Yes, Chair.
And the second presentation of PT was quite a lot. It will be good to go through that. Members, it's raining outside. I hope you enjoy your day. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Bye-bye.